everyone, and welcome to the second season of the Kitabi Karwan Podcast. We are back, and for our very first episode, we have a very special guest with us. We have with us Miss Navya Nanda, an incredible bibliophile to talk to. She studied at Fordham University, and apart from running her health based startup, which helps with feminine health and spreading awareness about the same, also runs a bookstagram under the handle Dust Off Your Books. This conversation was primarily revolving around how books play an important role in the development of mental health for readers and non readers alike, and how it should be made an integral part of our education system. But it got a few more shades than that and took a very interesting turn, and that's what led to this extra long episode. I hope all of you will enjoy this. So, without any further ado, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kitabi Karwan Podcast. I'm Siddharth, and today we have with us Navya Nanda. So, before we start this podcast, Navya, this is something I do with literally every guest who comes on the podcast. Give us an introduction about you, which we won't find on the internet.
Hi, my name is Navya. I'm a big bibliobuff, bookworm, whatever you can call it. I also am a big tech geek. I don't think many people know that. I I also love knitting. You probably won't find that on the internet. And I just founded my own health tech company.
Oh, that's actually quite interesting. So, Navya, and to all my listeners out there, so today's podcast episode is going to be quite different than what we usually do because we usually talk with authors, and we've done a couple of episodes where I've spoken about how you can go about reading or how you can improve your reading speed. This is the first one where so Navya and I connected on something where we wanted to talk about the importance of reading, particularly in mental growth and in your development as a human being, and particularly how it can play a very important role in education. So that's largely where the conversation's headed, but we're going to talk about a lot of other things as well. So, Navya, if I can ask you this, where did you start reading? I mean, if you remember, which one was your first book, or how did you get into reading? What was the first memory you have?
I think I got inspired or motivated to read because of my mother. She's a big reader. I always kind of remembered her as a child. I would, see her on the sofa with a big book in her hand. So I think that influenced me to start reading. Looking at her, seeing her spend almost 8 to 9 hours a day just sitting on the sofa reading. I was curious to know why she was so engrossed in a book. So I think I picked up, maybe my first book was definitely, Secret Seven or Famous Five from Enid Blyton.
Yes.
I think every child has probably read those. I would always have one in my bag, whether I was going to school, tuitions, classes, anything. I always had that. So those would definitely be my first books. But my first memory of wanting to read, or what kind of drove me to read, was definitely my mom.
That's actually very surprising because I have a very similar experience with how I started reading. So at my home, my mother's the one who reads a lot, like not my father, and she was very keen on me having a early head start towards reading or education, if you want to put it that way. So she introduced me to these magazines called Magic Pot. I don't know if everyone knows them or not. They used to come and they had these colorful cartoons and everything, and I started reading. She started helping me read them at a very early age, and I somehow just found the world supremely interesting, and that's literally how I got into the entire idea of reading. And yeah, I can totally I think everyone can relate to that one person in your family who's just lying on the sofa reading a big thick book and getting engrossed by reading. So Navya, something that a lot of people always talk about is how they have positive memories around books about how they enjoyed a certain book or how books made them feel certain emotions. But I think something that's supremely underrated or not spoken about is how books have helped people grow, right? I mean, for example, I remember I think one of the most impactful books and one of my favorite books ever that I read was The Kite Runner, which I read as a child. I know it was not supposed to be read by a child, but somehow it just came into my hands and I ended up reading it. And that, I know, I think that played a very important role for me in understanding how empathy and guilt, which something that I look back on and I realize is that how empathy and guilt about non-actions work in developing human beings. So did you have such an experience in, say, or when you started appreciating reading, what your reading book, say like your early teenage or your late teenage times?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I also started reading at a very young age, which was different to a lot of my, schoolmates, classmates, and friends. And I think the reason why I started was that I was a very socially awkward child. I still am very socially awkward. And I think even in school, I had a very tough time socializing with people. So I was that kid during break or lunch break that was actually sitting in the class reading a book instead of, being outside and playing with other people. So I think for me, it was just easy to disappear into a different world rather than to face the realities of what was happening around me. So I think that it stemmed from the fact that I was very uncomfortable in social situations, which I still am to some degree. And I think books gave me that kind of comfort to not feel pressurized to be a certain way and interact in a certain way, and just kind of let me disappear into a world completely
Right.
of my own. And I think one of the most impactful books that I've read is Wonder. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's also about a child who has, a disability, is in school, is mocked for it, and how he takes that into his advantage, by making himself, come out as the more, come out more superior to the people who were bullying him, or to
Right.
making fun of him. And there's a movie on it as well. And it's honestly a very heartbreaking book because it's a very young child. He's, I think, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I mean, of course, not so severe, but I related to a lot of the things he may have experienced in his school life, which was not really mixing well with people, and not being the most social person or the most outgoing person. And I think that is something that drove me to read books. And now I think I don't can't go a day without reading them, because I honestly would rather spend my time reading than being out there socializing. And because it does put me in a very uncomfortable situation. But yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that sometimes people aren't just reading for the sake of it. They're reading because it's helping them in one way or the other, whether that's mentally, emotionally. And for me, it's definitely not, I love reading, but it also is something that has helped me mentally grow,
Right.
whether that's in terms of escaping from certain situations, or just if I've had a bad day, and just reading kind of uplifts me, because I forget the world that I'm in, and I'm in a completely different world where
Right.
I can think what I want, imagine what I want, and I don't have to face the reality of it. But yeah, I think that that is where it kind of started, and the
Mhm.
experience that I have with books are still very similar in terms of escaping certain situations, and helping myself mentally, emotionally, if I've had a bad day, or
Mhm.
things like that. And I think people, like you said, it is severely underrated. People don't understand the impact that books can have on you, not just educationally or academically, but also emotionally. And I think that connect is something that is really missing these days. People believe that you read a book to get academically stronger, but I think that there's a lot more to it that people don't understand.
Right. Like I get what you mean, because so growing up through the 2000s and to like the 2010s, now that I can call it that, is something that I realized was that a lot of people would not read, right? Like I'm talking about people who strictly avoid books, and for whatever reason they do not read. They end up having this misconception around what reading actually is, right? Like they term it as a boring activity, or as an activity which isn't going to help them at all, right? For example, I know a lot of people people my age who see reading as a burden instead of an
Yeah.
activity that they might enjoy, or they might get like derive something from, right? For example, like I know a lot of people who might end up watching a documentary on a topic that they like and just hail it for the knowledge that they're getting out of it, but might not want to read for it. And that's something that I've always struggled with, because clearly that person is someone who well appreciates the knowledge that they're getting. But yeah, like something, just turning to a book for it is just something that they don't go for. So but moving on from that, something I personally realize is that I okay, so this is a slightly difficult topic to talk about, but there I have periodically suffered from depression and generally have anxiety, and this is something where books have generally helped me a lot, because not not from a clinical perspective as to understanding the psychology of it, although that was something I explored later on through books as well, but just in terms of dealing with what I'm actually going through, because that's something I think a lot of people in our generation struggle with, is that they're experiencing emotions which they don't really have complete grasp over, because it's not can't be classified into a bucket of, say, anger or love or whatever emotion they might want to put it. And I think that complexity is very well captured by books. So do you think, or do you've had like a similar experience with reading, or like just understanding what you're going through?
Yeah, I think similar to that, I mean, I have suffered from anxiety my entire life, starting from a very young age. So I think that I agree with you on the fact that books have helped me overcome that in many ways that people may not understand. I mean, especially for someone who's extremely anxious or who suffers from anxiety, I think the biggest problem is overthinking. You have a lot of thoughts in your head and you don't know how to calm them down, control them, and those thoughts can spiral from, it can go 0 to 100 very quick. You could be thinking of something as casual as walking on the street, and your thoughts could lead you to something that, may never actually happen. And it's just a part of what happens when you have anxiety or you suffer from anxiety. And I think books helped me overcome that, in the sense that when you are reading a story or even a chapter or even whatever the book it is, you're completely focused on the words on the book as opposed to thinking about anything that's going on around you. And I
Right.
think that just the art of that is so calming for somebody who suffers from anxiety, because it's
Right.
blocking out all the irrational thoughts that you may be having in that moment, and you're focusing primarily and solely on what you're reading. And that could be something from fiction to a mystery to a biography,
Right.
but you are 100% focused on what you're reading. And I think that that helps block out the anxious thoughts, the overthinking, the feelings that you may be having in that moment. And I think that is something that I experience, I actually actively do every time I feel like I'm going on an anxiety bender where I'm overthinking. I just pick up the book, and it's therapeutic in a way. It helps me calm down. It focuses my thinking, what I'm, my thoughts. It really helps control that. And I think it's important to understand that for some people it's a way of dealing with life, and you can't change the fact that you have these issues. And I think mental health is something that a lot of people our age feel, and they don't know how to express themselves, like you mentioned, or how to deal with it. And I think, of course, it's a very personal journey, and it's people have to see what's best for them, what suits them the best. But at least for me, books is a very strong part of that journey of trying to deal with it and trying to handle it to the best of my ability.
So, Navya, I know this is like a strict no-no for a bibliophile, but if I ask you to name a favorite book, I know it's very difficult to name one book, but let's say your go-to book, if your comfort book, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I feel like everyone has those books that you just pick up and
right,
you can read over and over and over again and
right,
just continue feeling good. Um, I would have a couple. I mean, I'm a very big Agatha Christie fan. I love mysteries, murder mysteries. So my
right,
favorite, all-time favorite book is Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile. I honestly can't choose, but I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. So she would
right,
be my favorite author, and either of these two books would be something I could read over and over again. And
right,
I would
right.
say not my favorite book, but one of my favorite books.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so that's the thing about comfort books, I guess. They don't necessarily have to be the best books you've read, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they just have to be books that make you feel a certain way. And that's, I think that is something people don't understand, because it's something I discussed this with a couple of authors in my previous podcast, where particularly, I know I can't really speak for the West as much, but in India, there is this emerging trend of for a lack of a better phrase, book elitism, wherein
Yeah.
uh, like even within readers, you have a certain classifier wherein if you read certain kind of books, you're supposed to be a serious or a an
Yeah.
actual reader, and otherwise you're just like this casual reader, which kind of, I know, personally I find it very demeaning and very odd, even though I fall on the other leave, going by these social norm specifying things. But yeah, like there's literally nothing to, I know, I personally find it something that's just weird for people to talk about books
Yeah.
in that sense, right? But you must be excited. I think there's a movie or a TV series coming out on the death of an
Death on the Nile, yeah.
Nile,
But
right?
I have to say that the new movie that came out, Murder on the Orient Express, wasn't quite up to the mark. It did not
Right.
reflect, the way that the book was written. I think if you see some of the older series, the
Mhm.
Poirot series, those are way better than the movie
Right.
that came out. I was a little disappointed looking at that movie. I went first show at 12 a.m. at night to see it. I was
Right.
that excited, but I was quite disappointed. So I'm hoping that this new Death on the Nile is going to be a better movie than Murder on the Orient Express.
So I'm just here going to pivot into a different direction for our conversation, right? And something that we discussed earlier was about how books has helped you through your dealing with, for a lack of again a better phrase, issues with such as depression and anxiety. So do you want to elaborate on what do you think the role of books can be if we integrate them into, say, the education system? I know as of now we have that, you know, functionary library lecture wherein you just, at least my school did, wherein we,
Yeah,
yeah, like once a week, I think for about half an hour, they just take us to the library and just let us pick up random books and read
yeah,
for half an hour, which is absolutely a horrible way of, I know,
yeah.
incorporating such an important activity in a child's life. But yeah, like, do you think reading should be incorporated into the formal education system, or it should just like remain at what it is right now and be promoted more as a hobby, right?
Yeah. I mean, at least for school, I remember we had that one library period in the week where we would go to the library, but it wasn't ever really for reading. I mean, maybe two out of the 30 children in the class were actually reading. The rest were just probably talking and using it as a free period, as we call it.
Yeah.
And then I remember also having book week, which was maybe once in a year where different, there were different books in the play area and you would go and choose a book. And I mean, I think that is, I mean, in a way, not really as encouraging as it. I think it should be integrated more formally into the curriculum
Yeah.
of a school, because like we mentioned, I think mental health, that's something that a lot of children face these days, especially in school. And a lot of them uh, aren't comfortable speaking about it or going to seek help. And you never know, if you introduce them to books, it may have a similar effect like it did for you or for me, and
Yeah.
that can give them a comfort in a sort of way of them finding a solution to something that they may be facing on a daily basis. And I think at least for me, I've had the opportunity to study in India and overseas as well. And I think that for me, I always loved reading, but I would have definitely wanted to see more of a push on reading when I was in school, because um, I think that it really helps with a lot of things apart from just emotional and growth. That way, it also helps you, with communication. I feel that I'm way better at communicating. I've grown from being socially awkward to now being able to do this podcast. So in a way, it seems that I can articulate myself a lot better, and I think I owe that to books. I think that you can travel the whole world just by sitting in your room. It gives you exposure to things that you may not otherwise be able to get exposure to. And I think that opening your mind up
Right.
to these things is so important, especially when you're in school, when you're in that developmental phase of your life.
Right.
It can help you with so many things, with language, with communication, and just simply analytical skills. Think creatively. You can be more creative, because I think that every reader has an imaginary world, and I don't think that any two people can read the book in the same way.
Right.
My imagination of a story is going to be very different to your imagination, and how I picture the character in my head, how I'm picturing the world. And I think just tapping into that creative side can open up a lot in the real world as well. It can help you in so many different things, whether that's work, whether that's
Right.
personal relationships. And I think that there is a lot that it can help you with, apart from just reading and writing an essay on it. I think that it can actually be a very, very important part of the education system, and I think it's important for that to really be integrated. And I don't just mean picking up an English book. I mean, we live in India, which is a very linguistically diverse country. We have
Right.
over 15, 16 languages, and I think that when I say that it should be integrated into the education system, I don't just mean English books. I mean Hindi
Right.
books, Marathi, Bengali, all these languages. I think it's
Right.
important to for readers to really not just read English, but also read in their own languages. I think there's a beauty in reading a
Right.
Hindi book, because
Right.
it's something that we will relate to so well. And I think it's
Mhm.
really dependent on the language that you're reading in, but it just makes that book way more relatable for someone. So I think it's
Right.
extremely important.
Yeah, like, so for me, like, from whatever you said, I actually broadly agree with everything that you mentioned. And personally, for me, that's one of the key things about why I would want reading as an activity to be a more comprehensive part of education, is because the kind of development the activity of reading brings about in a person is unparalleled in terms of, like, personally, I cannot imagine any negative effect to reading. And as you mentioned, right, like the boost that it gives to a person's creativity, or the way it brings them out of, well, uncomfortable situations, because they might be different for everyone. So it might teach a bully empathy, while it might teach, like, a socially awkward person the ability to express themselves. It might teach a person who's going through, I don't know, any personal issue, that it's okay to feel that way, while on the other hand, it might teach privileged people about what the other side or the other kind of people deal with. And so something that I've often thought about is, how do we go about encouraging reading among people, right? Because something that I've always noticed is that people have an apprehension towards reading. It's just dismissed as either as an intellectual activity or something that'll be boring, while they're actually doing the exact same thing with, say, any other activity that they're pursuing, like the documentary example that I went back to, or maybe, like, let's say, a movie, or I don't know, anything else. You're literally trying to get some form of entertainment, but say if I is being told that, oh wait, there is this other thing which will be just as entertaining but might actually also help you in other things, and people are avoiding. So I don't know, do you think there are possibly other solutions to this that we can come up with?
Yeah, I mean, with books, I definitely think it cannot ever be one size fits all. What I like reading is not going to be something that you may like. And
Right.
especially for people who aren't readers, they don't find it interesting, or they, like you said, find it a burden. I think for them, it's very important, especially when you're introducing it in an academic setting, to really align it with what that person enjoys, whether it's hobbies, whether it's things that they personally want to learn about. And it could be anything from, football to games to mysteries to documentaries. I think there's a book for everyone. You just have to really find what is going to interest them the most. What do they want to read about? And I have had friends who never read before, have now recently started working and have wanted to read books about business. And I don't think they ever understood before that there are books about business. There's books about everything. There's books
Yeah.
about sports. There's books about cooking if you want to cook. So I think that it's that aspect is extremely important to understand, that you don't just have to read a book about, like something very deeply philosophical or a historical book. You can read anything you want, and it can very much align with who you are as a person and what your interests are. I think that would be one aspect of encouraging people, to let them know that they don't have to read what everyone's reading. They can read
Right.
something that they want to read about. And maybe the second thing, which I don't know how I feel about, but audiobooks is something that has really picked up in the
Mhm.
last few years. And I think a lot of people who don't, naturally read very often have adopted at least listening to audiobooks. And that may be one way of, but I think
Right.
that defeats the purpose of everything we discussed in terms of
Right.
cognitive development. And
Right.
but I guess if you're new to it and you just want to kind of dip your toes in the water, that would be a okay way to start. But I'm honestly, I don't enjoy audiobooks at all. I much prefer reading and holding a physical book in my hand.
Right.
But I think that especially in the education system, it's important to not just, I mean, of course there are certain books that we have to read for exams and things, and we've
Right.
all, I mean, I've had that for sure. But apart from that, I think encouraging students to read whatever book they want and anything of their choice, maybe
Right.
monthly, or I mean, if it was me, every 2 weeks, but monthly, and then maybe share it with the rest of the class, and see how people are really relating to the book, what their experiences are after reading.
Right.
And I think just open conversation around it may encourage others to read as well.
Like it's very interesting that you mentioned the first example of your head was sports, because that's a hack that I've actually used to make all my guy friends read. Because I know why this stereotype sticks a lot, but a lot more women read than guys do, at least at your
Yeah.
younger age, right? And so all of my male friends refused to read earlier on, and invariably they were sports fans. So one of the first things that I did was recommend to them Sir Alex Ferguson's biography, because that completely exactly as you mentioned, right? Like it's something that they like, sports, and that's where they start reading, and bam, it just like changed the way they go perceive that activity, and like now they read a lot more than they used to earlier. And I know, so something that I've always this is something I've always thought about, like how to kind of get more people to read. And my, like, this podcast as well as the page that I run is kind of a initiative towards that thing. But something that I always struggled with when I used to come up with this idea where, get to students to read in school is this rebellious attitude you always have towards something that you're told to do, right? I mean, in school, it's not that in school, if you're told to do something, that's literally the last thing you feel like doing ever, right? So, I mean, telling a kid to go like read a book of their own choice, it's something I always imagine there'll be some, I know, negative, perspective given to it
Yeah.
right away by the audience that you're kind of aiming it at. And yeah, I mean, that's something I don't know. I don't really know a way to go about around it. Is how do you break this monotony of, well, you actually want them to perceive it as a hobby, but you have to kind of enforce it as an activity that is officially being sanctioned. So yeah, I guess that's something. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, until you try, you just don't really know. Unless you pick up that book and read it for the first time, you never know how you feel. And maybe that one time can change your opinion about it. And I think that, like you mentioned, sports, there are a lot of my friends as well who have never read before, and they've asked me, I want to read, I want to give it a shot, but I don't want to read what you read. That is a very similar phrase that I've heard many times. I don't want to read what you read. Give me something I'll enjoy. And I think that is the key. If it's something that you really want to learn about, you may actually just pick up that book and read, whether you're told to do it or not. It could be something like, I've honestly recommended Martha Stewart's book to my friend who enjoys cooking, and she loved it. And after that, she has started reading so many books. Whether that's cooking books doesn't matter. It's just the fact that she's reading. I think that's the important part. And that's what people need to understand, that whether you're reading a sports book, a cooking book, a book about, Elon Musk, or whatever it is, it's not that you need to progress from that and suddenly jump from sports to history and read about, East
Right.
India Company and these things. You can continue reading about what you like, and it's not about competing with people, and you don't need to read the books that I'm reading. You just need to read, and that is the point. You don't, I think people need to understand that, and maybe that may change their perspective on actually starting. I think a lot of people think that, oh, they're just giving me this book because, they want to get me to read, and then I'm going to have to read this and that. But no, you read what you want to read, and it's not,
Right.
no one's forcing you to read anything apart from what you are truly interested in.
So now there's this entire trend, or I don't know, where people have started drawing the line between reading as a hobby and reading as, say, an efficiency tool, right? Like as you mentioned, there are people, people who started working and now want to read about business, or you know a lot of other things, wherein people see reading as just a pure knowledge acquisition tool, wherein instead of, say, reading up about it on the internet, you just get like a good book on the topic and you read it, which is great. Like, but do you think this pigeonholing of things, uh, I know, kind of takes away from a person's reading experience in general? Or if I can just put it more simply, uh, do you think we should be ideally, as people who talk about books on social media platforms, right? Should we be pushing people towards reading different kinds of books, experimenting with their choices, with genres they're reading? Or should we just kind of, take the other side of things and let them read what they want to read?
I think that, yeah, of course, people should read to gain knowledge. I think that there isn't a book you would read without gaining any knowledge. I wouldn't, separate the two. I think it's important for you to learn, but I also think that it's important for you to read leisurely, if that makes sense. I think sometimes just read not to learn, but just to try something new. I think that,
Right.
somebody who may be interested in sports may have a mental block that, oh, I'm not going to like this romance novel, or I'm not going to like this this biography. And I think that it's the most unexpected books that you pick up that you just end up enjoying. And I have tried that many times by reading genres that I am not very interested in, and I have ended up liking it, and I have ended up learning from it, because you don't know where in your life you've had an experience that is relatable in that book. You could find
Right.
something very, very relatable to your life, whether you're a man or a woman. I think everyone has, at some point, I
Yeah.
hope, has experienced romance in some capacity. And I think that
Right.
you may have a mental block against reading a romantic novel, and if you pick it up, you may, may find some relatable episode from your life. And I think that you just don't know unless you try. I really believe in trying everything in life, and it will just help you.
So it's it's hilarious that you mentioned this, because this happened with me a couple of times. So I have people reach out to me on my Instagram page where they ask me for book recommendations, and one of the most common queries I get is from guys who have a very peculiar query, wherein they go, listen, I've had a breakup. Get I want to get into reading, and can you tell me a romantic book that I can read, or something that'll help me through this? Which is a very the first thing about this is it's a very difficult responsibility to take on, because clearly the person's coming to you in distress. But the second thing that actually throws me off is when the person, like, more often than not, I get a message saying, oh, can it be from a boy's perspective? And that just kind of throws me off, because that's what you mentioned, right? I think the beauty of books is that sometimes when you read things that you don't want to read or don't feel like reading is where you actually discover things that you need to know, or you like is something that you
Yeah.
needed exactly at that point of time. I mean, I had that experience back in, I think, 2015, I guess. Oh yeah, July 2015. So this was I was traveling, and this was like a couple of months after a difficult breakup, and that's when I read Gabriel Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera for the first time. And it's in today's context, it's a problematic book for whatever assumptions it makes. But yeah, it, I think, made a lot of assertions about romance and emotions, which I think resonate very strongly till this day and age. And I think that's just one of the experiences that I've had. And I think uh, it wasn't exactly the kind of novel that I would have picked up in the first place. It's just someone, like another person who reads, or like a really close friend whose opinion I trust on these things. She recommended it to me, and I tried it out. But that brings me to something that you mentioned. You mentioned you've started reading a lot more political and history books over the past few years, and yeah, I get it. Like that's something I'm supremely interested in. I'm a lawyer, but and as I mentioned, I'm studying for the UPSC, so that just becomes part of something that I have to do anyway. But let me just pivot back to something more lighter on the thing. So the way I met you was just through your bookstagram page, and that's something that I wanted to talk to you about. Like, what prompted you to like start a bookstagram page in the first place, or just like a book blog, if I can put it
So I always wanted to be a part of a book club. It's something
that.
that I always wanted to do, and I just never found people who were interested in reading as much as I was.
Right,
And the reason why I started this page was because I was actually, this was in March, I started it. So very, very early. It's not been very
right,
long. But I started in March. I was sitting at home during this lockdown, and of course,
right,
I was reading, because I was happy that I had free time to read sitting at
right,
home uninterrupted. I found a lot of my friends actually messaging me saying that they wanted me to recommend. Now that
Right.
is something that is very pressurizing, because you, especially for someone who doesn't read a lot, if they're reaching out and saying, hey, can you give me a recommendation, I
Right.
really take it upon myself as, okay, I need to give this person a very good recommendation, because if I don't, then they're not going to read
Right.
again. So it's a very, pressurizing situation to be in.
Right.
But a lot of people were reaching out saying that, can you give us some books to read? We have a lot of time. And I thought that, why not just start a page where I can review books that I have read and enjoyed, and not just stick to one genre. I think even in my page, I try to make this a point that I'm not just covering one genre. I'm covering everything from sports to business to politics, history, sci-fi, romance. I have a bit of everything on my page, and I think it's because I really want people to know that it's not just one type of genre. You can
Right.
read whatever you want, and there are books out there. And I think that is why I started it. It came from the fact that a lot of people were asking me recommendations, and I thought it would just be easier to put it on a page rather than
Right.
reply to everyone individually.
Right.
But I think after starting this page, I also found a lot of people, like you and a lot of other people who DM me and ask me for recommendations. I found people who genuinely enjoy reading, and I think that there are people who may have stumbled across it and said, oh, I found this book on your page, and it's interesting because it's not it all the books are different that you review. And I
Right.
honestly actively try to make sure that I do that not every
Mhm.
book is not the same, it's different.
Right.
And I think that is where it came from. One, to give recommendations, and two, to maybe someone will stumble across it and be interested in picking up that book. It was coming from a more of, I want to encourage more people to read. That's always something that I've been on a mission to do. Whether I'll accomplish it or not, I really hope that people can just come across it. And also making sure that the reviews are not very complicated. It's I
Right.
also try to review the book in a way in terms of how it made me feel, not so much more that this is what's in
Oh,
the
wow.
book and this is the content, but more of,
Right.
this book made me feel great. And whether it made me feel good or bad, I'll write that in the review, because I want people to understand that aspect of reading as well, not just the, like we spoke about, the knowledge acquisition, but also the emotional part of how this book made me feel, what I thought about after reading this book. So yeah, I think that was where this book page came from.
That's so. So it's great that you mentioned this, because mentioned that you wanted to write about how a book made you feel, because that's exactly where I started my page for. That like I saw that there's this entire thing online where you either have book reviews which are essentially like a copy paste of the book's blurb and like this weird rating system out of 5 or something, or just like very drably analyzing the writing skills of the author or analyzing it. And I didn't
Yeah.
really find a lot of content online, or like basically the problem that you mentioned, right? There's not a lot of people around who are like into reading or would like talk about how books are making you feel. And got me started up with Kitabi Karwan, and obviously the bit about lockdown that you mentioned. Yeah, like the lockdown kind of boosted my reading capacity, because my goal for the year on Goodreads was to read 25 books this year, but somehow I've already beat that goal, and I'm like trying to do this challenge where you read a book a week and 252. I doubt I'll be able to achieve it with everything else going on, but yeah, like it's really, that's exactly why I started this page, right? Like something that you mentioned, like finding other people who talk about this. And don't worry, like I mean, so this thing you mentioned about that, this mission on trying to get people to read more, or like just being able to give them a great recommendation. Like I've had people reach out to me and tell me, oh, they've read the review and they really liked what the book made me feel, and that's what got them to read that particular book or to start reading. And yeah, like it just feels great that you're building a community of things that you like doing. So yeah, that feels very interesting. But so that just kind of brings me to a very like an elephant in the room kind of question, right? I mean, you are I mean, your family is like highly influential in Bollywood, and that's, so I get that some that kind of brings a lot of media pressure, or about anything that you say publicly. Is that something that comes to your mind when you're writing about books, or like I don't know, writing about top, like a book that might be covered in the general, I don't know how to frame it in a much better way, but say being covered by the general media. For just as a very random example, say like you want to talk about a book which deals with suicide, right? And it is, I believe, at uh, something that should be spoken about, as both of us agreed on that. Well, mental health is a very important part of things. So, like, say if you post a bit about it in the past few months, obviously there's going to be a lot of backlash against, not backlash in the negative sense that why you're posting about it, but you know how it goes. So, is that something that always weighs down on you? And obviously, please feel free to not answer the question because it's not directly
No, no.
reading, but
I I think that I have always, I mean, of course, keeping in mind where I come from, my family, whatever it is, I've always tried to do things that are very different to what, they are a part of. I'm
mm,
not at all, interested in Bollywood. My interests are very different. I'm
right,
very, I'm more women focused, health tech. I want to be in business. I want to be an entrepreneur. I enjoy reading. And I think that those interests just fundamentally are very different. And I've always believed that I wanted to make my own identity and carve my own, identity for myself that is not associated with um,
right,
the great work that my family has done. Of course, not disregarding that, but I think that I've always thought that I wanted to do something different. And even when I'm writing or whatever it is, I don't ever, group that in with my family, because I believe anything that I put out there, whether it's, a podcast or my page or my company, whatever it is, it's something that I have done on my own and something that is unique to me. And when that's being looked at from an outside perspective, whether that's the media, whether that's the audience, whether that's anyone, I would
mm-hmm,
hope and expect them to judge it more from who I am as a person, as opposed to where I'm coming from and what my family
right,
does and what they believe in. I would want them to judge it based on, okay, Navya is an individual. She is doing her own work, and I'm going to judge whatever she's putting out there, whether that's her work, whether that's a book page or whatever it is,
right,
uniquely, and not, grouping that in with where she comes from and what her family does. And I
right,
think even when I post things, I mean, I don't have, a public account on social media, or I don't,
right,
my only public account is my work page. um I think that I'm posting, I think the book page would be the only one that is public. I'm posting about things that I believe in, and that
right,
I want to talk about and that I enjoy talking about, which is books. And whether that's covering topics about mental health or politics or romance or whatever it is, I'm doing it from what I believe in. And I think that that
right,
should not be understood as, oh, this is something that, her family believes in. It's very
right,
independent to who I am.
right,
And yeah, of course, there's always going to be media backlash. I think part of 98% of my anxiety comes from that. The fact that there is so much media attention, media backlash. But I think that's something that now I've gotten used to, and I've found my comfort, which is books. And I don't take it as heavily as I would have taken it, when I was younger. But I think that people are going to say what they have to say, and I just have to do what I believe in, what I'm passionate about. And I think if it makes even someone's life different, if I'm able to
right,
impact even one person's life, that itself is good enough for me. There could be 1,000 people who will abuse me for writing an article or posting about a specific book, but if one person DMs me saying, thank you for posting that review, I really enjoyed that book, it made me feel happy, I feel like my work is done. I don't really care about what anybody else has to say. And I think
right,
I've taken that similar approach with my company as well, which is
right,
focused on women's healthcare. A lot of people comment on the things that we post, and even though it is very important things that need to be talked about, such as sexual health and feminine health and women
right,
empowerment, there are people who will say things. But I think for me, it's more focusing on what the person is getting out of what I'm saying, rather than where they're coming from, and whatever else they feel that I am trying to push onto them. It's more of, I
yeah,
only look at the good that's coming out of it. So I don't really focus on what the media or what other people really have to say. I just want to make a change, and as long as I'm doing that, whether it's through books or health or
right,
anything else, I'm happy.
right. So, um, that's a very interesting thing that you mentioned, right? Like your startup about feminine health and women empowerment. Could you elaborate a bit on it? And the other bit that I just want you to talk about along with it is, do you do you kind of use reading to somehow promote feminine health, or like particularly in terms of how do you deal with, because of unfortunately how society is structured, to deal with stuff like harassment or uh, trauma that's caused by just being the discriminated gender, or in general, does feminine health somehow kind of sync up with your love for reading into some form of better therapy?
Yeah, I think that I read a lot of books, over the last year from some very powerful women figures, whether that's Samantha Powers, Michelle Obama, Sheryl Sandberg, who've all in their own ways kind of started movements supporting women. And
Yeah.
I think reading those books and reading the work that they did, mostly in the US context, kind of motivated me to say that, this is something that India needs. It's something that women in India need. And I think it's important for other women to stand up for it and to reflect the things that are happening and to make that advancement, whether it's in people's thinking, whether it's in society, or whether it's in women themselves. I think women don't realize the power that they have. And I think that when they see other women speaking up for each other, it motivates them in a way, And I think reading these books actually motivated me to start something of my own, and
Mhm.
to start something of my own focusing on women. So I would definitely say that reading these biographies of these three women pushed me to say, okay, maybe, this is something that India needs and do. And I
Mhm.
think that starting this company was not only influenced from what I've read, but also from a lot of personal experiences that I face as a woman living in India. And also, looking at how other women in India um, are treated or have the experiences that they have. And I think that it comes from a genuine personal experience of, I don't want this to happen to me anymore, and I want to be able to have access to healthcare, or I want to have the rights to say what I want, and things like that. And I think that that is what this my company is focused on doing, even though it's very healthcare focused. I think the most
Right.
fundamental aspect of that is that we don't have the freedom to speak about feminine health as openly as we talk about everything else. And that is something that
Right.
we do a lot of work around, is really educating people about feminine health and making them realize that it's okay to talk about your health, whether that's menstruation, whether that's anything. It's okay, it's your body, you're allowed to talk about it, and it's your health. So I think that came from a combination of reading these powerful women doing powerful work
Right.
and really wanting to bring that work into India and hoping that it can make a positive impact, because there are a lot of things that need to change. And, we can talk endlessly about what those things are. But I think just making that change for women in India, I think, is where the inspiration from these books came. So yeah, I would definitely say that a lot of the books that I've read have motivated me to do what I do right now, and also have helped me maybe understand the different kinds of things that I need to do through this company and this venture. So yeah.
Right. Okay, so Navya, that brings us to the end of this podcast. I just have one question before we end this. If I ask you to name 5 books you think literally everyone in the world should read, which 5 books would this
Okay, Harry Potter. Everyone has to read Harry Potter, and I mean all of them, because
be? Right.
it's a birthright. You have to read Harry Potter. Um, I would say Kite Runner is a good one. Actually, I would use that as well. Um, I think this is a tough question, but um, I would say, honestly, I don't know if people will read this, but The Anarchy, because I think it gives you a very good understanding of how India came to where it is today, what happened. And I
Right.
think every Indian should understand that, of what happened,
Of
how we
course.
got to that point, and how we overcame it. That's the most important part, and how we have gotten to where we are as a nation. I think Anarchy does a really good job of summarizing that and giving you all the right information about why and what and how.
Right.
Um, the fourth one, honestly, I would say, but this is more for women, but Becoming by Michelle Obama. I think that every woman should read that, because she gives a very honest description of her life as a woman
Right.
and the struggles that she experienced and where she is today. And it was just a very motivating book in general. And I would say, because I'm biased, Agatha Christie, everyone should read an Agatha Christie book. I would say Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile. There are honestly so many, but these are the five that just came to me on the top of my head.
Okay, then thank you so much for joining us on the Kitabi Karwan podcast. It was really great having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it was a really fun conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you did enjoy it, do check out our other work. We talk to other authors and do talk about general book reading habits or book recommendations. I'm sure any bibliophile will love it. And don't forget to check us out on social media, primarily our Instagram handle @Kitabi Karwan.